freedom of speech, cancel culture, and the law. After reading the content under SOSC 1000 Week 22 about freedom of speech, cancel culture, and the law, a question which came to my mind was how can the law effectively balance the right to free speech and the responsibility to prevent harm or discrimination? What considerations should be made when these rights potentially clash? In the context of cancel culture, the collision between the freedom to free speech and the necessity to avoid harm or discrimination is a nuanced interaction that highlights underlying social tensions. Cancel culture, which is characterized by the broad public censor and exclusion of people or groups for their statements, deeds, or opinions, has sparked discussions about the proper limits of free speech and how to balance them with the goal of avoiding harm or discrimination. On the one hand, the idea of free speech is fundamental to democratic society because it gives people the freedom to voice their views and beliefs without worrying about censorship or government reprisal. But as cancel culture has grown in the digital era, the effects of speech have increased, creating conflict between this prized freedom of speech and the duty to stop harm or discrimination. Cancel culture frequently develops in reaction to conduct or words that particular communities or groups find hurtful, disrespectful, or discriminating. Opponents of free speech emphasize the possible harm that such speech could bring, while proponents of the right to free speech contend that even contentious or unpopular statements should be protected. In other words, they believe that everyone is entitled to their own opinions, regardless of the way it may affect others around them. This collision happens when people or communities experience psychological anguish, prejudice, or marginalization as a result of practicing their right to free expression, whether on purpose or not. The difficulty increases in the digital sphere, where social media sites function as forums for public conversation. Free speech can easily turn into online outrage, which can have a negative social, economic, or professional effects on the person who is being faced with ostracization, or in other words, being canceled. Online criticism can have a greater impact due to its speed and virality, which can occasionally result in a reaction that is out of proportion to the speech that was given and goes beyond what is appropriate. The difficulty in this collision stems from figuring out where to draw the line between defending free expression and preventing harm or prejudice. In an effort to negotiate this terrain, legal frameworks and social norms impose speech restrictions such as bans on hate speech, defamation, and incitement to violence. Determining these boundaries in a way that balances individual liberties with the welfare of society and the defendants of marginalized groups continues to be difficult, though. Complexity is further increased by the subjective nature of what defines prejudice. What is considered detrimental or discriminatory speech by one group may be considered a lawful form of expression by another. In the context of cancel culture, this subjectivity frequently sparks discussions about censorship, the influence of social norms, and the function of institutions in controlling speech. In the end, this collision emphasizes the necessity for thoughtful debates and flexible legal frameworks that protect against real harm or discrimination, while acknowledging the intricacies of contemporary communication. Navigating the cancel culture shaped terrain and striking a careful balance between the right to free speech and the obligation to stop harm and discrimination continues to be extremely difficult. The clash between the fundamental right to free expression and the necessity to put an end to discrimination in the context of cancel culture highlights the delicate balance that legal frameworks and social norms require. Managing this collision requires a nuanced strategy that recognizes the intricacies of contemporary communication, upholds individual freedoms, and concurrently protects against actual harm, assuring a delicate balance within the legal framework. In a legal sense, the term free speech rights refers to the safeguarded freedoms that allow members of a community to freely express their ideas, opinions, and beliefs without fear of retaliation from the government or excessive interference. These rights, which are generally protected by laws, charters, or constitutions, are the cornerstone of democratic societies all throughout the world. Fundamentally, the right to free speech is the belief that people should be allowed to freely express their opinions in order to participate in public discussion, debate, and idea sharing. This freedom encompasses a wide range of expression, such as written or spoken words, symbolic artistic acts, works, and in the modern era, digital communications via internet platforms. Legally speaking, these rights are frequently upheld by statutes or constitutional clauses that define the parameters of protected speech. Legal safeguards for free expression are not unqualified, nevertheless. Limitations may be imposed on them in order to maintain public order, safeguard national security, or shield certain people or groups from harm. The legal interpretation of the right to free speech highlights how important these rights are to democratic nations. By permitting dissent, government criticism, and the promotion of social, political, or cultural change without fear of retaliation, they act as a check on authoritarianism. In a democratic setting, free speech encourages accountability, openness, and the vigorous interchange of opposing ideas, all of which are necessary for well-informed decision-making. Furthermore, under the legal framework, the rights to free speech are frequently linked to other rights like the freedom of the press, the right to assemble, and the right to form associations. All of these rights work together to create a strong foundation for human rights and civil freedoms, allowing people to actively engage in public life and influence society as a whole. Fundamentally, legalized free speech rights are essential to democratic societies because they allow people to freely express themselves, question accepted wisdom, and energize public discourse, while also acknowledging the necessity of responsibility and moral expression that refrains from unjustified harm or discrimination. According to the Human Rights Act, the prohibited grounds of discrimination are race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, marital status, family status, genetic characteristics, disability, and conviction for an offense for which the pardon has been granted or in respect of which a court suspension has been ordered. This passage from the Human Rights Act of 1985 describes the precise characteristics in the framework of human rights laws constitute illicit grounds for discrimination. It outlines the several characteristics that, in any event of discrimination, are legally protected for which people are protected from unjust treatment or prejudice. Conflicts between the freedom to free speech and the need to stop discrimination or harm within cancel society can arise when provocative or conscientious remarks have negative effects on specific people or groups. I will now outline some scenarios where this clash becomes evident. There are cases where people target marginalized communities with hate speech because of their color, religion, sexual orientation, or other protected traits. Proponents of free speech may stand up for the freedom to voice these opinions, but opponents point out that doing so hurts certain groups and makes them more vulnerable to marginalization and discrimination. Celebrities, politicians, and other public personalities are frequently the targets of canceled culture because of their previous remarks or deeds. While some contend that these public individuals should be held responsible for their actions or remarks, others raise concerns about the justice of applying penalties to one's personal or professional life in light of occasionally misinterpreted utterances. Conflicts arise in academic or intellectual circles when ideas that are controversial or provocative contradict accepted wisdom. The right to free expression safeguards the examination of other points of view, but if these concepts reinforce negative stereotypes or ideologies, they may conflict with initiatives to stop harm or prejudice. Cancel culture is a common phenomenon on social media when those who make provocative remarks or behave in a controversial way risk losing their jobs, being publicly shamed, or being boycotted. This altercation raises concerns about proportionality and the possibility of overreaching effects by demonstrating the tremendous influence the internet outrage may have on a person's life. Artists frequently walk a tightrope between honoring sensitives and expressing themselves creatively. Situations in which artistic creations, books, movies, or visual arts cause controversy because of their subject matter could result in conflicts between the freedom to express oneself artistically and the necessity of avoiding harm or offense. The conflict in these circumstances between the right to free speech and the need to prevent discrimination or harm within society illustrates how difficult it is to strike between societal norms and individual liberties. Although the right to free speech is important for encouraging discussion and the interchange of ideas. Some expressions can have negative effects that prolong harm, strengthen stereotypes, or marginalize particular groups. It's nevertheless hard to decide where to draw the line between speech that is damaging and acceptable. Cancel culture frequently exacerbates this conflict by amplifying the effects of speech through social media dynamics and public opinion, sparking discussions on the proper course of action and the possible effects on one's livelihood or general well being. This conflict highlights the continued need for thoughtful debates, moral questions, and flexible legal frameworks to handle the intricacies present in the relationship between free speech rights and avoiding discrimination or injury in cancel culture. There are a magnitude of high-profile cases where these clashes have occurred and analyze their legal implications, in which I will now examine. First off, in the article Public Response to Racist Speech from E-Class, Considering the Victim's Story by Mary J. Matsuda, there were three specific examples of racist hate speech. One instance being, and I quote, "A black family enters a coffee shop in a small Texas town. A white man places a card on the table. The card reads, 'You have just been paid a visit by the Ku Klux Klan.' The second one being, a law student goes to her dorm and finds an anonymous message posted on the door. A caricature image of her race with a red line slashed through. The third being, a Japanese American professor arrives in an Australian city and finds a proliferation of posters stating Asians out or racial war, displayed on telephone poles. She uses her best educated inflection in speaking with clerks and cab drivers, and decides not to complain when she's overcharged. These are all prime examples of racist hate speech. These are not crimes in the name of the law. They do not affect others. In Mary J. Matsuda's article, Public Response to Racist Hate Speech Considering the Victim's Story, the focus is on the impact of racist speech on its victims. Matsuda explores how society should respond to such speech by considering the perspective and experiences of those targeted. She emphasizes the importance of understanding the harm caused by racist speech and advocates for a more empathetic and supportive response towards its victims within the public discourse. A popular high-profile case of hate speech would be Kanye West, an American rapper, singer, songwriter, record producer, and fashion designer. In the fall of 2020, Kanye had made many racist and anti-Semitic remarks both on social media and in person, whether it be in his tweets or him publicly wearing t-shirts that say White Lives Matter at Paris Fashion Week. There is no justifying his actions. It is safe to say that as a result of his actions, he was canceled on social media. The reaction from the public was swift, with several companies, including The Gap, Balenciaga, and more, terminating their relationships and brand deals with the rapper. Due to the fact that America is a country of free speech, there is no legal ramifications for these hateful remarks, but there is no doubt that certain groups are offended by Kanye's actions. In today's culture, it seems that cancel culture is a placeholder for legal ramifications for offenses that are not punishable by law, such as hate speech. Next, we have the Matt Rife incident. Matt is an American comedian and actor best known for his self-produced comedy specials, as well as his 2023 Netflix special Natural Selection, and the previous recurring role on the sketch improv comedy and rap show Wild 'N Out. Matt Rife has recently faced backlash from his release of his new Netflix special Natural Selection. His comedy special opened up with a joke about domestic abuse. Rife begins by telling a story about a time he and a friend went to a restaurant in Baltimore and the hostess greeting them had a black eye. When his friend expressed pity for her, commenting that they should have put her in the kitchen, where nobody has to see her face, Rife's punchline was, "Yeah, but I feel like if she could cook, she wouldn't have that black eye." Since the majority of his audience is women, they did not take this very well, and he was canceled over social media. Amid the backlash, Matt proceeded to post to his Instagram story saying, "For anybody who has been offended by one of my jokes," with a link to a special needs helmet. This Matt Rife situation questions the often blurred lines between comedy and hate, as well as whether it is okay for comedians to make jokes about serious topics such as domestic violence. Many people are offended by Matt's jokes, while others believe that they shouldn't set boundaries in comedy and that comedians should be able to joke about anything, and if you take offense, then you shouldn't be watching. It's truly a multifaceted situation. An article by National Post has an interesting perspective on the situation. According to Jimmy Carr, if you start drawing the line of what people can and can't joke about, it becomes very difficult because someone's offended by everything. This quote touches on the idea that humor is subjective, and what might be funny to one person could offend another. Setting boundaries on what can or can't be joked about can be challenging because people have diverse perspectives, sensitives, and thresholds for what they find acceptable. As a result, navigating these boundaries becomes complex, as almost anything can potentially offend someone. It highlights the delicate balance between freedom of expression and respecting others' feelings. There was also a situation in which I learned about in grade 12 English class that dealt with an author being canceled after the debut of her book, American Dirt. American Dirt by Jenny Cummings tells the story of a Mexican woman named Lydia and her son Luca, who are forced to flee their home and embark on a dangerous journey to the United States after a drug cartel violently disrupts their lives. The novel explores the perilous trek through Mexico as they attempt to reach safety in America, entering numerous challenges and hardships along the way. It develops into themes of migration, survival, and the human spirit amidst adversity. However, the book received mixed reviews and sparked controversy over its portrayal of migrant experience and the author's background. Controversy had sparked admin Oprah Winfrey's book club pick. We had watched this interview in class where Oprah Winfrey was interviewing the author of American Dirt, Jenny Cummings. The controversy surrounding Jenny Cummings' book, American Dirt, revolves around questions of authenticity, representation, and cultural appropriation. Critics argue that Cummings, who was not of Mexican descent, took liberties in portraying the experiences of Mexican immigrants, perpetuating stereotypes and simplifying complex issues related to immigration. The novel didn't authentically capture the nuances of the migrant experience and accused Cummings of relying on cliches and stereotypes. There were concerns that the book reinforced a particular narrative about Mexico and migrants that didn't fully represent the diversity and depth of the community's stories. The controversy sparked debates about who has the right to tell certain stories, the responsibility of authors to accurately represent cultures different from their own, and the publishing industry's role in promoting diverse voices. Critics argue that while the book aimed to shed light on important issues, it ultimately fell short in its portrayal and representation of the migrant experience. Former President Donald Trump has made controversial comments on immigrants and various minority groups in the past, which sparked debates about the line between free speech and hate speech. Where to draw the line? According to Washington Post, since launching his presidential campaign in 2015, Donald Trump's words have raised eyebrows for their characterizations. The object of his verbal attacks range from the media to liberals and even to conservatives who have not embraced his political ideology rooted in hard-line stances on immigration and nationalism. But no group has been the subject of his ire as have immigrants, especially those who have entered the country illegally. The line distinguishing between hate speech from free speech is a topic of much discussion. Under the First Amendment of the United Constitution, a broad spectrum of expression, including diverse or unpopular viewpoints, is generally protected as free speech. Nonetheless, hate speech can violate other people's rights and safety when it targets people or groups according to traits like gender, color, religion, or ethnicity. Determining the boundary between expressing an idea and instigating violence or harm to others is difficult, which sparks debate about how to strike a balance between the protection of free speech and preventing the harm that hate speech does. To conclude, how can the law effectively balance the right to free speech with the responsibility to prevent harm or discrimination? What considerations should be made when these rights potentially clash in the context of canceled culture? In the context of cancel culture, the conflict between the essential right to free speech and the need to eradicate discrimination emphasizes the fine balance that laws and societal norms must maintain. Handling this clash calls for a sophisticated approach that takes into account the complexities of modern communication, respects personal liberties, and simultaneously guards against real harm, ensuring a careful balance within the legal system. The complex intersection of free speech rights and the imperative to prevent harm or discrimination, particularly in the context of cancel culture, underscores the need for a balanced and nuanced approach. As demonstrated by key legal precedents and high-profile incidents, reconciling these competing interests is no easy task. However, by engaging in thoughtful debates, considering moral implications, and implementing flexible legal frameworks, societies can strive to uphold cherished freedoms while safeguarding against harmful repercussions. It is through this delicate balance that we can navigate the complexities of contemporary communication and foster a society that promotes inclusivity, respect, and the well being of all individuals.